You're currently watching the Stella Modeling User Guide video series, which is a series that is intended to be a companion to the Stella M User Guide. This video will go over pathways in a single-year model. In this video, we will go over the definition of pathways in Stella M and key concepts related to pathways. And then we will talk about the 3 ways to add pathways to a model. We'll go over creating a pathway using the modeling panel, and this section will include information on how Stella M calculates total days homeless based on assumptions entered for a pathway. Then we'll cover creating a pathway in the model library and creating a pathway in the CoC library. How are pathways defined in Stella M? In Stella M, a pathway is a distinct combination of project types that a household is provided while involved in the homeless response system with the goal of helping the household obtain permanent housing. Pathways are used to represent how households are expected to move through the system. For example, a pathway could be a household entering an emergency shelter, getting connected to a rapid rehousing program, and then getting housed by that rapid rehousing program. It's important to determine what combinations of project types should be available in the ideal system. There's also the concept of served versus unserved in Stella M. Households offered assistance in a pathway to housing within the model year are considered served, and households not offered or do not enroll in a pathway to housing within the model year are considered unserved. The 2 different universes in Stella M also need to be considered in pathways assumptions. The inflow universe represents households coming into the system each year, including new and returning households. The long-term homeless universe represents households that were in the system but not served in the previous year. Characteristics of each pathway could be different depending on whether a household is part of the inflow universe or the long-term homeless universe. For example, we could have the same 4 pathways for both universes: emergency shelter only, emergency shelter plus rapid rehousing only, and permanent supportive housing. But the percent of households expected to go through each pathway is different based on which universe we are looking at. So perhaps for inflow, we expect 55% of households to go through the emergency shelter only pathway. But for long-term homeless, we expect 30% of households to go through the emergency shelter only pathway. These differences between the universes are important to determine what pathways should be available in the ideal system. Let's get into Stella M. When you start a new model, there are no pathways. Right now, we are looking at a single-year model that has no pathway information in it. You can see that it says pathways incomplete right at the very top. There's also incomplete data in our target year dashboard, and there's no data showing in the results preview chart section. To add pathways, there are 3 options. If you are building pathways you expect to use in multiple models or in both universes in this model, inflow and long-term homeless, we recommend you first create them in the CoC Library, which is a button that is always on the top left, and then attach them to the model that you are working on. This will help you save time. If you're building a pathway that will only be in this particular model, you can choose to build that pathway in the model library that appears when you click the Pathways and Project Types button in the navigation toolbar. I'm going to scroll down to the modeling panel for the last method. This section is the modeling panel. If you're building a pathway that will only be in this specific model for a specific universe, so inflow or long-term homeless, you can choose to build that pathway using this Add Pathway icon in the Pathways pane. So we're actually going to start here in the Pathways pane. The Pathways pane is the leftmost pane in the modeling panel. And we're going to create a pathway just for the inflow universe. So we're going to click that Add Pathway button, and that will open up the model library. When you first open up the model library, there is the I statement at the top right, which is the button that looks like an I. And this will give you more information on creating, editing, deleting model pathways in the model library. To create a pathway, you would click the Add Pathway to Model button on the bottom left of this window, and this will open up the Create Inflow Pathway window. This window also has an I statement at the top right. This pop-up will give more information about creating a pathway and the different fields in the screen. In this window, you can either create a pathway from scratch, or you can use an already existing pathway in the CoC library as a template. You can do that here. Choosing a pathway from the CoC library will pull in that pathway's information so that you don't have to start from scratch. Another note as well, anything with asterisks are required to be completed. Let's go through the fields one at a time. First is the model pathway name. Pick a name that is concise yet helpful. It could be useful also to check whether or not your CoC has naming conventions for their pathways in Stella M. Then you have the model pathway abbreviation. This will serve as the unique identifier of the pathway, and this abbreviation will be used throughout Stella M in different charts and tables. Both the pathway name and the pathway abbreviation have to be unique. Stella M will not let you save a pathway with a name or abbreviation that already exists within the model. Next is the model pathway description. This is an optional field that you can use to describe the pathway that you have created. Then we have the universe targeted field. Because we are adding the pathway from the inflow section of the pathways pane in the modeling panel, it's automatically set to inflow and we aren't able to change it. Then we have the performance characteristics of this pathway. These aren't required to be filled in to save the pathway, but the values will default to 0 if you don't put anything in it. And if they are 0 in your model, it will produce inaccurate results. The first of these performance characteristics is the percentage of households served expected to use this pathway. So if we put 20% in there, it's saying that we're expecting 20% of all households served in the inflow universe to go through this pathway of emergency shelter, then rapid rehousing. The second performance characteristic is the percentage of households served expected to exit to permanent housing. If we put 80% in there, it's saying that of all the households that use this emergency shelter to rapid rehousing pathway, we are expecting 80% to exit to permanent housing. And the third performance characteristic is the percentage of households served expected to return to homelessness after exit. If we put 10% in there, reading that field, it says that of all the households served within this pathway who exited to any destination, 10% are expected to return to homelessness within 6 months. Then we have the number of days served in each project type section. This is asking you to either select which project types are part of this pathway using this drop-down here. This drop-down includes all of the projects that are in your CoC library, or you can create a custom project type using the Create Custom Project Type button if it is a project type that does not already exist in your CoC library. When you create a custom project type from this screen, you are creating the project type in the CoC library, and it will be available for other pathways and other models. So let's get back to our Create Pathway screen. So first, let's put in our emergency shelter project type and then our rapid rehousing project type. And once you've selected your project types, you have to put in the number of days that a household is expected to be served in this project while homeless and once housed. So in this example, we're going to say that in emergency shelter, they're expected to be served for 90 days while homeless, and then in rapid rehousing, the households are expected to be served for 30 days while homeless and 180 days once housed. In the while homeless column for this section, there are these checkboxes. When you add a project type, this box defaults to being checked. If it is checked, it means that this number of days homeless will be included in the total days homeless calculation for this entire pathway. So what does this mean? Currently, in our Emergency Shelter to Rapid Rehousing pathway, both boxes are checked like you see here in this top row. That means that the households in this pathway are expected to experience homelessness for a total of 120 days. 90 days while in emergency shelter and an additional 30 days while in rapid rehousing. If we uncheck the box for the rapid rehousing project type, like it is in this bottom row, it means that these 30 days are already counted in the 90 days that are spent homeless in the emergency shelter. So if a household were enrolled in an emergency shelter and a rapid rehousing project at the same time, that means that their total days homeless calculation for this pathway would only be 90 days because that 30 days in rapid rehousing overlaps with the 90 days in emergency shelter. Back to Stella M. You are also able to click on the units field within this section to get a drop-down to change the units to either months or years. And if you need to delete or take out any of these project types that you added for this pathway that you're creating, you can click the trash can next to that project type. The very last field in this window is the notes field, where you can add notes so that other users and key partners in the system modeling process can understand the data, the decisions, the ideas behind this pathway. And now that we're done, we can click Add to Model Library. When we get out of the Model Library screen, you'll see that there is a message in the Pathways pane saying that we have to set the household assumptions for the info universe for the target year. This is done through the Households button in the navigation toolbar and is covered in the Households video. So I've quickly updated the inflow household assumptions, and I'm now going to scroll down to the Pathways pane in the modeling panel. Since this is a single year model, we are modeling our ideal system in the target year, so we will plan to serve everyone. So we're going to enter the number served to match the total number of households, which is 500. And when I do that, you should have seen both the results preview and the dashboard change as I edited that served number, because both of these are dynamic. And I do want to note that if you adjust the total number of households in the households window, you will then need to also adjust the number served. The pathways pane will be covered more in depth in another video. Let's go through the other ways that you can add a pathway. So if we scroll all the way up to the navigation toolbar and go to the Pathways and Project Types button, clicking this will open up the Model Library, where you have two tabs, the Pathways tab and the Project Types tab. The Pathways tab should look the same as the Model Library window that we opened in the Pathways pane. And to add a pathway here, you would just click the Add Pathway to Model button on the bottom left of the window, and that would open up the same Create Pathway window we were looking at previously. Now let's create a pathway through the CoC Library. The CoC Library button is at the top left and can be accessed at all times, no matter what page you are on in Stella M. When you click that, you are in the CoC Library window. And here again, we have two tabs, the Pathways tab and the Project Types tab. In the Pathways tab, you're able to create, edit, delete pathways for the CoC Library. To add a pathway using this window, you would click the Create Pathway button on the bottom left. So again, adding pathways to the CoC Library can be useful to save time if you have standard pathways that you expect to be used across multiple models. Or if you want to build a pathway to be used in both universes of your model, you can build it in the CoC Library and then add it to each universe. So let's actually add a pathway to this model that I'm working on using a pathway from the CoC Library. So let me get back to the model we're working on. I can do that by either going to the Model Library through the Pathways and Project Types button in the navigation toolbar, or I can scroll down to the modeling panel and add a pathway through the Pathways pane. So let me open up my Model Library and click Add Pathway to Model. And then up here in the Create from a CoC Library field, I'm going to choose the Emergency Shelter Inflow Pathway from the CoC Library to use as a template. Now we see it pulled in the assumptions that were in the CoC library for this pathway. So you see that there are percentages here already, and there is this number of days served while homeless for the emergency shelter project type. But let's say that the assumptions for this specific model is a bit different, like the number of days homeless is not actually 90, it's 60. And I am going to, let me quickly add in the required fields so I'm able to save. So changing this assumption here is only changing it for this model that I'm working on. So if I add it to my model library, and then let me get out of this model library and go back to the CoC library, and I open up that project type that we used as a template, which is the emergency shelter inflow, you'll see that it did not change this number of days served while homeless assumption in the CoC library. And it goes the other way as well. If the assumptions for pathway are changed in the CoC library, like for example, this actually is 80 days, it won't change any of the assumptions for any pathway already added to a model, even if they use this specific pathway as a template. So if I change that to 80 in the CoC library, and I go back to my model library and take a look at the emergency shelter inflow pathway that we added that used that specific pathway as a template from the CoC library, we can see that it did not change any of the assumptions that we had already done. Thank you for watching this video, which is part of the Stella Modeling User Guide video series. Other videos in this series will cover different aspects of the site and how to use Stella M. On your screen is the URL for the Stella and System Modeling page on the HUD Exchange. That page will have more information and more resources for you, including the Stella M User Guide, which this series is a companion to. If you have a question about Stella M, please submit an AAQ. The URL for that is on your screen as well. Disclaimer. This material is supported by funding under an award from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Neither the U.S. government nor any of its employees makes any warranty, express or implied, or assumes any legal liability or responsibility for the material. No references contained herein imply an endorsement of the material by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, its employees, or the U.S. government. Any opinions contained within the material are those of the authors and/or contributors and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development or the U.S. government. Thank you for watching.